What is the DSA and how will it affect hunting? How's it going to affect our outdoor experience? Also today, how are the elections, upcoming elections, going to influence what we're doing? And later on in the show, Chris Vaughan from Hunter Nation joins us. Welcome back to the Sportsman's Voice. I'm your host, Ken Sikora, here for another episode of what's happening this week in the outdoors issues and, how are things going to affect us. And obviously we teased the DSA a little bit, the Democrat Socialist Association. And but I kind of want to start today with how my day started. We're getting into August now, and it gets kind of exciting. The corn now is starting to tassel. The soybeans are 1.5 feet high. We got a little rain. The farmers are happy. If you planted a food plot, you were ecstatically happy because nothing was happening for the last 3 weeks with the lack of moisture up here. And so this morning, I usually start my day around 5 o'clock and head out of the house 5:30. I'm driving down the road, and there's a little group of deer that I've seen headed to the golf course. And I just stopped and got out of the truck and took a little video. And it was neat. It was just a cool morning. The sun was coming up. There's crickets are chirping. Some birds are starting to move. And it just reminded me of why we do what we do. Why are we passionate about this? Everyone works and we have all these crazy things. Our kids are in sports and work and everything going on in today's world. And then suddenly we hit this time where we can actually just totally let everything go and sit in the woods and watch things unfold in front of us. And I almost feel sorry for people that aren't hunters, because this is like, it's a release that, you say sometimes half the world is crazy. They don't have the release that hunters have, So it's just a little experience from this morning. And that kind of got me to thinking about, all the good things that we have in Wisconsin, all the great, these beautiful mornings, these sunsets that we have, obviously we had a big storm a couple days ago it was just crazy. But what is it that is bad for us, right? And we're going to talk a little more politics today than we normally do. Because this is we are a hunting and fishing show, but we combine this political things into this and how's it going to affect us. And there's a new term out there right now, the DSA, Democrat Association of America. And how's it going to affect us? What changes are we going to see if some of these individuals that are running under this get elected? Because we talk all the time about, these social issues, right? We have healthcare, we have schools, and our kids getting the right education. What are they learning? What's teaching them? There's the abortion issues and all the social issues, right? And people fight on both sides of that. Everybody's very opinionated, but the reality of it is we're a state that's 50-50, right? And no matter who we elect, those issues don't change that much. There's a Supreme Court, legislature makes a rule, and then the governor signs it, and then the Supreme Court reviews it. And in the end, it always seems like we come back to the same place we started at, right? And we spend like 90% of our interaction with other people that's maybe combative, talking about those issues. And then as sportsmen, we talk about deer hunting. We talk, we can sit as if you're an outdoorsman, as well as I do. You can sit down in a group of guys and talk all day about that. But how does that relate to politics, right? And the reality of it is that we can elect a politician that maybe will represent us on our social issues, and we get nowheres. But if we elect someone that's against what we do and the outdoors, we can lose everything. And when I look at that video from this morning and I think about, just how nice it was, I stepped out of my truck and took my camera out and it was quiet and it's peaceful. What if we couldn't do that? What if that is gone? What if farmland is taken away because there's people out there right now that think farmland should be owned by the government or one large corporation or one billionaire, right? These are all issues that are out there right now. And I think we have to discuss them today. And it'll kind of tie into our Hunter Nation talk with Chris a little bit later. How does the election change the outlook of hunting for us? And I just did a quick search on ChatGPT. I'm not a huge tech guy, but I'm learning to use all this AI, and it's crazy what you can learn in 3 seconds, right? Just if you're in a socialist society, I just Googled, socialist society, can you own guns? And the answer is almost absolutely no. Well, how do we hunt without guns? Can you own a bow? No. Weapons. I mean, yeah, there's even restrictions on knives in socialist societies. And so just imagine where we elected someone that has those thoughts, that thinks that way. What does that mean for us? They are definitely not going to advocate for guns. They're not going to advocate for us being able to freely own them and freely buy them. And that trickles back to our hunting. You can. I also did a quick search of how much hunting is allowed in socialist nations. Almost none. Some of the elite wealthy get to hunt. They're real happy to let people from other countries come in and hunt as long as they have very tight restrictions on what kind of weapons they can bring in. But if you're a citizen of a socialist country, imagine all of a sudden you're not allowed to hunt because under the socialist idea, the government owns everything. So they own the wildlife. And that might take us back 300 years to where the king owned everything. If you grew up in England 300 years ago, 400, 500, 600 years ago, the king owned the wildlife. That's one of it's not why we fought a revolution, but it was part of that, right? That as free Americans, we are the God-given right to enjoy the things that he created. And whether you're a hardcore Christian or not, I think we all have some understanding of what that means to us, the ability to go out there and enjoy stuff. And there is that internal argument from the DNR and the government's side, which is who gives us the right to hunt? I would say our rights to hunt come from the person that created the animals that we hunt. And can that be taken away from us? Obviously there's laws. If you break certain laws, you can lose your access to hunt. And I understand there has to be a little give and take. We can't have somebody go out there and shoot 10 deer a night and continue to do that. That right has to be taken away. But is it a God-given right? Is the ability to go out there and hunt, something that should be denied before we even get the chance to do it? And so as we look at some of these candidates that we have out there, there was a debate last night, and I can tell you one subject that was never touched was the outdoors. Fishing and hunting. How do they feel on it? I don't think any of these individuals have done any of that. We had Crowley, we had Francesca Hong, and these are the two front runners in this race at the moment. And I have no confidence that they will do anything to help us in the pursuit of what we love. And so, as if obviously, I'm sure it's come out that this is a conservative program. And I know a lot of hunters are conservative, but there's a lot of hunters that aren't. And they voted Democrat their whole life. And I think we are at a crossroads right now where we're going to have to seriously look at this and say, what matters more to me? Fighting over social issues or being able to do the things that I love to do, that I want my kids to do and my grandkids to do. And for me, if I lived my life and did nothing, and my girls who like to hunt now are raising kids of their own 10 years from now that'll never be able to enjoy the outdoors, that would be a tragedy. That would be, and that would come back to me because I did nothing. That would come back to you guys as hunters because you did nothing. And so we're going to have to look really hard at these issues. And we're going to talk to Chris in a little bit about that. Like, what does he recommend you look for? Because hunters or politicians just don't come out and tell you what they're not going to let you do. You got to start thinking about it. How do they hold a gun when they do a press conference? What are their activities? Do they own guns? We've seen some in the past. There was a guy running for vice president 2 years ago that said he hunted, and then there was some searches done. It turned out he didn't own a weapon. Well, what was he hunting with? Then they did a little ad with him holding a shotgun, and he didn't know how to load it. So it was, he said it was his shotgun. So that would be a real key part for me looking at that guy and saying he's probably not going to represent what I want, And I think we're at a crossroads right now. There are a large majority of citizens of our state that will tell you they love the outdoors and they're in favor of it, but they don't take it any farther than that. Their idea of the outdoors is a walking path. It's a park, and when they get to that park and they see a hunter, there's a problem. No, so when they say I love the outdoors like you do, no, you don't, because you would be happily. There's a lot of videos. You could just Google videos of people harassing hunters, for doing something on public land. It's a big problem. So we have to start seriously thinking about what is the most important to us. What do we want to pass along to our kids? what part of what we vote for can't we affect at all? Because there are things we're just not affecting. I mean, we've been fighting over the same things. I'm 54 years old. We've been fighting over the subjects, some of these subjects for 54 years that I can remember. Even you go to the Iran war, it's a great thing. That happened when I was in fourth grade, the start of this. We're fighting over that 48 years later. Nothing I voted on changed any of that, right? I mean, I think I'm happy with some of the things that are being done. Some people are unhappy. We could argue all day, but nothing has changed. I voted for, I don't know, 8 presidents in that term, and we're still kind of in the same argument. But I'll tell you what has changed is what I can do with hunting and fishing. And, for example, parks. What parks are open to hunters? If you go up north in the National Forest right now, when I started coming to Wisconsin 20-some years ago, there was you had to drive slow on the back roads because the logging trucks were rolling, and you would see deer on the side of the road. Literally everywhere you drove in the first 2 hours of daylight, in the last 2 hours, you would see deer on the side of the road browsing in those areas. You do not see that anymore because past presidents shut down logging, so that changed. Now there's less deer. Then the wolves are introduced through federal laws. So. It gets back to my point that I started with is I voted on social issues, and other people voted on how they felt differently than me on those social issues. But the end result was both of us lost what we love the most. So we got to start thinking a little clearer on this, and I know we want to talk about fishing and hunting and everything else, but we can't talk about fishing and hunting if it's taken away, if it's restricted. When I go up north and I suddenly find that the road that I used to access to get 3 miles back into the woods is closed off because some anti-hunter thought that should be a refuge area now. That sucks. I just lost a really good spot. And you know how much more habitat that created? Zero. Because most of the deer come out to the edge of the road to feed because that's where the nutrients are. They salt the roads, there's nutrients along the side of the road, and that's where the deer end up. So, this all trickles down and affects, where we're at, how these things interact with what we do. And it's one of the reasons that we started this show, because we have to talk about all of these issues. We have to get into some of the uncomfortable subjects that can get a little controversial sometimes, and delve into them. And let's start to look for these key things in our politicians. And, we're going to be going forward. We're going to bring Eric Wimberger on. He's going to talk about the audits they've done. And it's shocking. I've seen some of these audits, and the money that's being spent on programs that do not help any of what we love to do, and the people that are put in place to do these. This is another thing that comes into how do we vote? Who would Tom Tiffany promote? Who would he have running the DNR? Is this guy going to be a hunter? Because I want a hunter and a hardcore fisherman, right? I want a guy that is going to dig right down to the nitty gritty of what makes everything we do better. I don't want some vanilla guy that's just going to say, well, I love the outdoors. I'm pretty sure whether it's one of those other candidates that was on TV last night, they're going to pick a political individual. I don't want a political individual. I want an outdoorsman. I want a guy that's going to have to learn the political side of it, but totally knows about the hunting and the fishing side of it. So, let's start paying attention to this, guys. And, let's talk about this a little bit more. I hope I can create a situation where the environment opens up a little bit and you're more comfortable talking to your friends and neighbors about what do you see in this person? What do you see in that person? So definitely something that we have to consider as we go forward. Okay, we are super excited today to introduce a special guest, someone I've gotten to know in the last 6 months to a year. Chris Vaughan. Chris is the Wisconsin representative for Hunter Nation, and we're going to delve into a little bit of why he got involved and what got him involved and some of his thoughts on going forward. Welcome to the show, Chris.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks, Ken. Thanks for having me.
No, we're happy to have you. What I guess the first question would be, what kind of outdoor sports do you participate in? Because we're kind of curious from a Hunter Nation standpoint, like, where your passions are, and then what got you involved with Hunter Nation? What was it? What was that key thing?
Yeah, I started off, I'll get into hunting a little bit later because that started later in life. I grew up, my grandparents lived on a lake. I grew up fishing. Had a kind of a neighborhood pond in a small little community I grew up in northern Illinois. And so almost every day, we'd ride our bikes down and go fishing almost every single day. So I grew up, mainly fishing, but spending as much time as I could outdoors. But I hadn't really, we had BB guns and stuff like that kids had. So most of my time was spent fishing, but then I actually got into hunting once I got into college. I went to school in Northern Michigan University up in Marquette, Michigan, in the UP. And the first weekend I was up there, I got invited to go out to a deer camp, and that
That had
word
to be a
honestly
different
was new to
experience,
me.
huh?
Yeah, and so I said, well, what's a deer camp? And so we went out there because when you go back to school and college, you start and then you've got Labor Day weekend right away. So then you go to school for a couple days and you got a long weekend, and we're like, all right, let's go to deer camp, whatever that is, sounds cool. And just fell in love with it, and met some folks up there that took me under their wing. It was actually some roommates' parents, and their dad gave me a bow. It's this, I still have it. It's actually sitting behind me over here. It's this gigantic, old compound bear bow that's about 4 feet long.
Yeah.
And
It's amazing what we
just
used to
started
kill
shooting
stuff with, isn't it?
nuts. It's nuts. Shooting with just fingers, a single pin, and I had, that string that you put on the end of your arrow there to track it, to track you put it behind, the fletchings, or I'm sorry, in front, just on the arrow itself. And yeah, it's just kind of where we went from there. Spent time, then we'd grouse hunt during the day, and then walk the woods. Then we'd set up and we'd build tree stands and stuff. And so then I was just hooked. I mean, that was early '90s for me, and then I actually got my dad involved in hunting. It's usually the other way around, and then so I took my dad out hunting for the first time, when I was in college, and so for me, it's been just an obsession ever since the early '90s when I was in college.
So how did that then lead into Hunter Nation? What precipitated that event?
Yeah, yeah. So my kids were always involved. I've got three boys, one of which hunts fairly consistently, bow hunting anyway. And so this goes back to kind of the COVID days. I know a lot of people reference those, especially now with Dr. Fauci taking the stand here today, and a lot more coming to light that we all knew about anyway. But that's a different story. Um, but my middle son wanted to go bow hunting that year. So, and this was at the time of COVID, and and the DNR at the time was blocking hunters education classes. Well, as you know, we have a constitutional right to hunt and fish here in the state of Wisconsin. And I saw Hunter Nation getting involved, and they're like, no, you can't do that. We can do these online. And the DNR had to be threatened with a lawsuit by Hunter Nation. And there was a few other things that happened at that time. Lakeshore Business Association partnered with Hunter Nation because during that time, the state said they allowed us to hunt. Thank you. I'm sorry, to fish. But then what they were saying is you could have people on your boats. We'll leave the boat launches open for you. Um, but you could, but you
Actually, in
could
O'Connell,
exchange
I don't
money.
mean to interrupt you, but in O'Connell, they actually closed boat
So I mean,
launches.
what
Yeah,
rationale, what logic is that?
yeah, yeah.
So I thought, yeah, I mean that's insanity. It's insanity. So I saw Hunter Nation get involved in that, and the charter captains were considered then essential workers, and so again had to threaten with a lawsuit. So I just really liked what Hunter Nation was doing because at that time I was not a political person, and kind of the same as what we see and we'll probably talk about later at a different episode is you just kind of clean up your own backyard, sit on your own porch and let things unfold. But then I started to see, and when it affected my kids directly, and then once I've been involved, started getting involved and started attending these meetings and the events and seeing how much policy and politicians had potentially to influence both ways. And then realizing how many people, in the hunting and fishing and trapping community were not involved, and the opportunities that were being missed or lost or taken away from us because we didn't engage in these types of things was just a massive eye opener to me. And I didn't want that. I couldn't let that continue, and I didn't want that to continue for my family or for my brothers and their kids and kind of that next generation, because we're already seeing a dwindling number of next generation getting involved in hunting and fishing.
Yeah, I think it's one of the, with youth, it's one of the fastest growing sports in the country. Guns, whether it's guns, bows, hunting and fishing, and sometimes I feel like when I've talked to people about Hunter Nation, they'll say, well, that's just a predator population organization. So it sounds to me like Hunter Nation does a whole lot more than just predators and issues of those. I mean, you guys are in there advocating for all kinds of things, correct?
Yeah, I would say that predator management is at the forefront of what we do, and that's just because of such the hot topic that wolves have been. When we got involved in some coyote contest stuff that came up a few months ago within the NRB, where they wanted to ban what the anti-hunting animal rights activists were calling killing contests. But these things are very important. But we're involved in a lot of things. We're involved in the CWD discussions, sandhill crane hunting. We got involved in the northern leash laws. We introduced legislation for stocking trout and pheasants and turkeys. So just kind of a wide range involvement with the DNR audit and following up on those kinds of things. Big discussions about license fees increases. I personally have opposed those, not because we can't afford it, but for other reasons that came out in the audit. So, yeah, we've got our hands on a lot of things, but you're right, Ken. I mean, the predator management piece does seem to kind of fall, but at the end of the day, we fight for hunters' rights across the board. We're not species specific, but it seems like lately we've been doing a lot of predator management stuff.
And then you guys also, correct me if I'm wrong, you're a non-political organization, right? So you guys talk about
Correct. Yeah.
you guys can talk about people, things you might look for in a politician. You can talk about all of the issues around hunting, but your organization doesn't endorse candidates. You don't go campaign for candidates. You're more so dealing with the issues that hunters want, correct?
Correct, and that's what I do. So I'm education and outreach. We are a conservative organization, completely conservative. We do have a C3 and a C4, so the ability to get involved in some campaigns does exist. That's not my role as a state director here in Wisconsin. So again, as a conservative organization, we're going to tell you to vote your values. What are those values? God, family, country, Constitution, Second Amendment rights, pro-life. And when you look at the candidates, one of those candidates clearly sticks out more, than the other. But where we do get involved is policy. So the Pet and Livestock Protection Act, obviously that's a policy that was brought up, by our congressman here, Tom Tiffany, and then Congresswoman Lauren Boebert out in Colorado are the two main authors of that. So getting around policy is something that we do, and I spend a decent amount of time in Madison, working with the Sporting Heritage Committee in both the Assembly and the Senate. But again, that's around policy, not around politicians.
Now, people might not be aware, but we have an upcoming event up in Forest County, I believe the 13th of August, and this is a event where we pair together some political issues. We're going to bring in some politicians, Hunter Nation, and you're going to come in and kind of do a whole outline of the how the wolf issue plays into this, what you guys do, and what we're really trying to do is get people to understand that there's some politicians that, I mean, you would take all these social issues out of it, right? The issues, the abortion issue, the health care, the school, all these things that people fight about, and try to narrow it right down to what is it that we care about as outdoorsmen. And so we'll be working together on that. We've done a few of these already. Pretty exciting to see people come in. I would say the majority of people come in are conservative, but we're looking to reach the voter that might be a little undecided and say, okay, you're a hunter. These are the things that are going to happen in hunting. And I've had a lot of fun doing this with you. It's great to see the different programs that you guys have. What do you think right now is the biggest threat to Wisconsin hunters? As you're looking out there, we have CWD, we have the wolf issue. We have what in your mind is the biggest threat to Wisconsin hunters right now?
Yeah, I'd hate to say it's one. I think CWD is huge. I think it's the wolves are huge. I think the Wisconsin DNR is a problem. I think the NRB is a problem, which is an appointed, non-elected position that's appointed by the governor. I look at hunting and hunters in general, and we've got 800,000 licensed hunters in the state of Wisconsin, and we've been very aggressive, and this number is changing. But on average, 50% of licensed hunters don't vote. And so you look at that, and you could do some backwards math. So, again, the numbers are skewing a little bit more in our favor from a conservative side. So out of those licensed hunters, about 60% would vote conservative. And so, if we could get, most of those conservative hunters to vote, I mean, there's no reason we'd ever lose an election again, but that simply doesn't happen. So I think that's kind of at the forefront of a concern, of just getting the right people in place, so we don't have to fight these types of things. But I think the CWD fight is a massive one. And it's another polarizing one. So the two biggest issues would be that and wolves that are just absolutely polarizing, and people on the the complete opposite end. The CWD, our fight is not to say that CWD doesn't exist. Of course it does. But is it as detrimental as everybody says? And the amount of money that our state spends, I think it's about $3 million annually with a DNR that runs in a deficit, that's just going to suspend wolf depredation payments until July or June of next year because they're out of money and running a deficit. But we're still spending $3 million a year on CWD to just test animals with no outcome except, all right, well, we're going to expand the range of baiting, or we're going to close this county down because it's within the buffer zone and perimeter of where we found a deer with CWD. Nothing's changing. Nothing has changed. And year over year, we spend that money. That's my thing. That's why I don't. That's the CWD.
Have you seen any research into numbers of hunters, the decline in hunters since CWD came to be? I know there's some people out there that say, hey, I don't hunt because I only hunt to eat and I won't, not sure about the CWD. I mean, is there any tracking of that? Has Hunter Nation ever tracked, what kind of, how this factors in? Because the other thing that we hear is the rates of people leaving the sport and coming in. And, it's funny, if you're a hunter, it always seems like there's more people coming into the sport than leaving. But then you see the actual numbers and it's the opposite. So, can we tie that together with the lack of deer in the Northwoods, the CWD scaring people away? Have you guys had any research in those areas that we can actually use hard numbers on that show people leaving the sport?
Yeah, and we're leaning more and more into that. Nothing that we've published publicly yet, because I think we still need to firm some stuff up. But there is some data there that supports that, and then the concern of what we have. Because again, if you look at that demographic, on average, it's folks in my age, your age, stuff like that. And so I think we are seeing more and more of the youth getting involved, and I relate that back to some of the things that we're doing to get involved in trap and skeet teams, and getting that next generation involved in shooting sports, and then translating that into another form of hunting, and that's usually a pretty good overlap. And then educating the next generation of how important they are in this process of keeping our outdoor heritage alive. So I'd say more to come on that one.
What do you think? And this is just brainstorming a little bit. I mean, what do you think as hunters? Well, I'll back up for a second. In O'Connell, we have a sportsman club that started a youth organization that they do an event once a year, and they bring kids in. They shoot bows, they shoot guns, they trap shoot. They're near the river, so they take them down and they fish. They do all these different things, and then they finish up with a bunch of free stuff from Cabela's. They give away these prizes, and it's grown from 50 kids to 150 kids. What do you think, from your perspective with Hunter Nation, that we can do to encourage more kids? I mean, obviously that is one thing, but is there something that you could see change legislatively that would get more kids involved? There was the law that changed. It said you can hunt at any age, and that's, I think that's good. There's some people that would tell you it isn't, but what's your thoughts on new ways to get more youth involved?
I think that's where the groups, come in, get involved too, in opportunities, and whether it's, some of these programs where we get, bows donated, or, a 22 donated, and then having, clubs. I mean, you were out there a week, or, whatever it was, on the 18th, and we had a lot of kids running around in Rice Lake. We held an event in Rice Lake, and we opened up the 3D target range, and that was because of sponsors through Vortex, and through the club itself, and through Henry Repeating Arms, and just the opportunities. And I think that's where it falls, unfortunately, in groups, whether it's groups like yours, it could be even GOP type groups, it could be hunting groups, it could be, the archery clubs. But, I think that's where we've had more success, because we haven't had a ton of support. I mean, there is the, kids fish free, or, the free fishing weekends and things like that. And then, the weekends, during the deer season, for youth hunters. So, I mean, things like that are clearly important. I hear the same things where people, accuse others of taking advantage of that and having, a young kid. It, it does happen, but that's our problem. We have too much infighting. We see that within the parties too. If we stick together and we see it, whether it's, a compound guy, versus, a crossbow or traditional archery, it's like, guys, we're on the same team, so yeah, I think there are more things. I don't have a specific thing specifically from the legislature, but I think that's what we're focused on is targeting, certainly within the voting side of things, those new voters, and that's an opportunity that we have to, and we've got to make sure that they stay engaged with things like coyote contests. That's a big thing where that's that can be fun. It's kind of like fishing. When you take a kid fishing, you don't start them off musky fishing, right? You want them to take them pan fishing. So getting kids involved in squirrels or birds or coyotes or things like that are fun and exciting, and then kind of building that up. But we want to make sure that they stick around.
I think sometimes we're too much of purists. Like we want to start off and we want to teach them how to do everything the right way. And sometimes it's just taking them out and let them do stupid stuff and have fun. We have to remember they're kids, right? And my dad was not a hunter, but he had no idea how to hunt. I had no one in my family that hunted. And but what he did do is he took me out in the woods and we tried to squirrel hunt. I don't think we ever killed a squirrel. But just the fact that he was trying made a difference. And then I saw deer. And I'm like, why can't we kill deer? He's, well, there's no season. I don't know how to deer hunt, and I don't have the right weapon. But that was the seed. The seed was planted. And I think sometimes anything we do to plant that seed is huge. And the other thing I would, going back to what organizations, I think the idea of these private clubs and partnering with these private clubs. And have you had a lot of good interaction with the Hunter Nation? As a Hunter Nation representative here in Wisconsin, what's the interaction like between pheasant clubs, sportsmen's clubs? Has there been a lot of are they open to bringing you guys in, and is that something that you do?
Yeah, I would say we've had one gun club that turned us down for an event because they didn't want political speakers coming. But the thing is, though, is I've always opened it up to both sides. It's just one side tends to show up and the other doesn't. I mean, I've held events up in the Ashland Bayfield area, which is not very conservative at all. So every year I hold a meeting up there, usually in February or March. And I've invited the legislators, the elected officials up there, both Republican and Democrat. And every time it's just the Republicans seem to show up. And so we're very open for discussions. We have these campfire. We've done it too with different elections where we have like these Zoom campfire meetings where we'll bring in our founder Keith Mark, who and our chairman, our national spokesperson Ted Nugent, and we've opened it up to Ron Johnson and Tammy Baldwin, or folks that are running, and very, very rarely do we get any of the Democrats that show up. So again, while we're a conservative organization, but so I'd say the short answer, Ken, is that no, every location that I've talked to has been very open, excluding one very recently that just said they prefer not to have, or their bylaws required them to not allow political speakers.
Very, very interesting. Yeah, I always wondered how the reception was. Lastly, I got one more question for you, and to me, this is a really important one here. We have a primary in 2 weeks, a general election in less than 90 days. I think we're right around 90 days, right? So this is the key time if you're an outdoorsman and you're looking at what issues are gonna work for me, and what politician is promoting them issues. If you're a hunter right now and you're considering a politician, what do you recommend? Because let's be honest, politicians kind of talk in circles, right? There's a lot of them that aren't very direct. So if you go and say, "Are you for hunting?" A yes answer would, a lot of them are going to say, "Of course I am." But what questions should they ask when they're in front of a politician? What should they be looking for? What keywords that would help them differentiate if someone's going to help them, hurt them, maybe not do anything, or worse, hurt the sport? What's your suggestion as they attend these events?
Yeah, I think pay attention, and meaning, and I'll talk personally. If I look at and I see an event where Tom Tiffany is speaking, he's a Northwoods guy, grew up on a dairy farm, had a business up in the Northwoods, Is he a full-time dedicated hunter? No, I don't think so. Does he love the outdoors? Yes. And going back to what you said, I think everybody, even if you look at the other two candidates, again, I'm speaking personally, if you look at Hong or Barnes, they're going to say, "Oh, I love the outdoors. It's great to get outside and walk around and things like that." But to have a firm understanding of what that means, and then there are other policies that would affect what we do. Gun ownership is a massive part of our lifestyle. And we saw one candidate that took an exceptionally tragic situation in Madison and turned it immediately political and calling it a state sanctioned execution. This is somebody that wants to abolish the police department. And so I would look at the two candidates, um, Mandela Barnes. He posted a cartoon picture of a saltwater barracuda and called it a muskie. Clearly, the guy doesn't know what he's doing. Photo ops out on the ice, you know, uh, looking clearly uncomfortable. Not that ice fishing can be the most comfortable thing in the world, but just photo ops. But my concern with yeah, I mean, just hell, I mean, look at our current. He didn't know how to hold a fish, and so I think our gun rights are at the forefront, but then just the blind trust that somebody like Hong or Barnes, again talking personally, would have with our DNR and our NRB, compared to Tom Tiffany, who says he'll split the DNR, which needs to happen because the DNR has proven through this audit that they don't spend the money that we put in to projects that primarily benefit hunters and fishermen, and we primarily produce most of the money in there. And so you would have that blind trust of those two agencies with somebody other than a guy like Tom who's dialed in and works with outdoor groups, not just Hunter Nation. He works with a ton of other outdoor groups, to so it's not pigeonholed into one thing, so that we're all supporting these policies. And he knows the importance of who we are, because if you look at outside of Madison and Dane County, a little bit of Waukesha County, I mean that's real Wisconsin, as far
I
as
would even go as far as that. There's a lot of hunters in those counties.
no, there are. Yeah,
It's
yeah,
crazy when
yeah.
you see the numbers pouring north deer season. But no, we really appreciate you coming on today. Thanks for doing this, and we'll look forward to having you on again. And keep
Absolutely,
up the good work. We can't be thankful enough, because I should mention before you go that this isn't a full time paid position. You have another job,
No,
and
no,
like so many
yeah,
others,
yeah.
you're doing this in your extra time away from your family, and we're very thankful for that. So once again, thanks, Chris. We
Yeah, and likewise, yeah, you too. I know you've got a business to run and busy family. So we do this, like you and I, we do this because we love it. We know it's important, and if we want to kind of keep our outdoor heritage alive, this is the work that we're committed to. So I appreciate the work and the partnership that we have as well, Ken.
We'd like to thank Chris for joining us today on the podcast. And it's just great to have people that are passionate about this. Once again, these are individuals that are have a job, have a family, and they're stepping up to help us. And it's important. We need more of these. I can tell you that Hunter Nation is always looking for more volunteers. They're always looking for individuals to help them out. There's a lot of areas that I think we could touch with that organization, tabling stuff and getting out in sportsman clubs. And it's something we're going to be working on with them. And it's interesting. I met Keith, who's the founder of Hunter Nation, 2 weeks ago, way up in the far northwest of Wisconsin, and up by the Race Lake area. And we just kind of sat down, had a little talk about, hey, how did you get started in this? What led to this? And Keith was a guy that actually had an outfitting business, and it's kind of odd. He's partnered up with Donald Trump Jr. Because he's a big hunter, and that led to him getting to meet Donald Trump, and he was being so passionate about the outdoors. The one question he asked him was, "Hey, how come you don't go to hunting events and hunting shows?" And because he was running for president, this would have been right around 2015, and Trump looked at him as a businessman who doesn't hunt and doesn't fish, and said, because hunters and fishermen don't vote. And the funny thing is, Keith pretty much thought that he was off target. So he's saying, "Nah, that can't be true." He went back and did a little research. And all of a sudden, oh my God, he's right, you know? And one thing we've learned, and Keith made this joke actually while he was speaking, that, you know, he said he learned something very quickly when he did his research. He goes, I already know hunters were liars because we all lie about the size of our buck, the size of our fish, everything we do, right? But he goes, it turns out they lie about being registered to vote. And that led to Hunter Nation and the fact that now he's formed this organization of millions of individuals that are passionate about this. And part of that too is that, you know, we use this term lobbyists, and I know in political circles it's an unpopular word, but we have to have people that lobby for us, right? And so as an organization with thousands and millions of members, we now have individuals that are lobbying for us. And he's been able to bring on people like right here from Green Bay, you know, one of our favorite sports figures, Brett Favre. You know, you go into the hunting with Ted Nugent, and a lot of country music stars have come on board. I mean, Jeff Foxworthy, Donald Trump Jr., obviously. And so he's been able to bring a lot of access to political names through the organization he started, and then the power behind these individuals, their names, and the recognition to take that message out. So we're really thankful for what they do, and we'll definitely have some more of them on. I hope to have Keith on as a guest in the near future. And like I said, I can't be more thankful for people that are doing this, because it has to be done. You know, if we all kind of mind our own business and go our own way and do our own thing, we're going to end up with nothing. You can just kind of see how this goes. So, you know, it's a big deal. You know, we have to continue to talk to there's other organizations that we're going to be talking to also that are working in these areas that you know, I think are a big help to us. And so, yeah, once again, thanks, Chris. So we're looking at next week's show. We have a big Cabela's sponsored tournament in Ocano this weekend for the fishing. They're looking at walleyes, and we'll be doing some video out there, some interviews, gearing next week's show toward a whole bunch of the fishing issues as we head into the late summer part of our fishing up here in Wisconsin. And we'll be excited to have you on, and we'll be bringing you a whole bunch of clips for next week. But once again, thanks so much for joining us, keeping you on target here with the Sportsman's Voice. Thank you.